Hi, welcome to Daily Pronunciation. Today's word is propaganda. This is a noun which means misleading information or ideas to promote a certain cause. For example, you can say, fear-based propaganda has been used throughout history by the governments of many nations to justify wars. Now, I'm going to demonstrate how to pronounce the word. Please watch closely how I use my lips, teeth, jaw, tongue, and facial muscles to say the word propaganda. Propaganda.
Yesterday, on Monday, the U.S. did detect through its satellite and intelligence assets an Iranian ballistic missile launch. They believe it was a two-stage rocket. They believe it was the type of rocket, as you see the pictures here that the Iranians released, the type of rocket that could be used to launch a satellite. This is going to be the type of two-stage rocket, of course, that also could be used to attempt to launch long-range weapons.
Concern is growing about the threat that Iran poses in the region and what Israel is prepared to do about it. Are you prepared to go to war with Iran if necessary?
John, we're committed to the sanctions program. The President has said repeatedly that he is determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Just yesterday, National Security Advisor General Jim Jones said a nuclear Iran presents a mortal danger to all states in the Middle East. A nuclear Iran can pass on nuclear military capabilities to terrorist organizations that will trigger a nuclear arms race in the Middle East and undermine non-proliferation efforts worldwide.
There is a new terror study out, a bit frightening too, getting our attention today, warning the U.S. of a clear and present danger on a massive scale. It's called an electromagnetic pulse attack, otherwise known as EMP.
Well, an electromagnetic pulse is a result of a nuclear explosion or another weapon that releases a wave of electrons that will fry every electronic gizmo or tool that civilization needs to survive.
Well, who would likely use a weapon like that?
Well, we know that major civilizations, major nations have built electromagnetic pulse weapons. They're potentially a very effective weapon, but they're not that complicated to make, and it's likely that terrorists could actually make some of the weapons, or countries like Iran and North Korea could use their nuclear weapons to create an electromagnetic pulse.
And a groundbreaking report out of the Pentagon says that the U.S. is woefully unprepared in the event of a nuclear attack. A Defense Department advisory panel warns that the country's ability to survive this kind of offensive has seriously deteriorated, and that report comes as President Obama pushes for shrinking the U.S. nuclear arsenal.
Something that commentators have been writing about, the threat of what's called an electromagnetic pulse attack. This would be a nuclear explosion that doesn't necessarily cause a lot of damage on the ground, but is higher in the atmosphere and disrupts our communications, our computers, our information technology, which, given the way we communicate today, could have an absolutely devastating effect.
Why is the U.S. government trying to start a war with Iran?
Basically, until 1979, U.S. and British oil companies owned most of Iran's oil. In 1979, with the Iranian Revolution, the oil companies were kicked out. Since that time, I think it's safe to argue that U.S. and British oil companies and our governments have felt that that oil really belongs to them and have been trying to get it back. It's a tremendous amount of oil. Oil is not just about the profits that would be yielded to oil companies if they owned the oil, although it is a lot about that. It's also about the global power garnered by who controls the last bits of global oil supply.
2/3 of the world's reserves of oil and natural gas is in the Middle East Central Asian region. The largest is in Saudi Arabia, the second largest in Iraq, and the third largest in Iran. Control of this region has been policy since the U.S. emerged a new world power after World War II. In order to dominate the world, we must control the world's oil, and we must not tolerate countries that show how independence and defiance of the U.S. is possible. Plain and simple, the U.S. agenda is world domination.
Controlling oil means you have a stranglehold on the world economy, and you have a stranglehold on countries who use oil. Either they depend on it for their economy or they import oil.
The U.S. established business and military partnerships with the dictators in the region. The Saudi royal family in Saudi Arabia, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and the Shah in Iran. The countries and their oil were under control, but with Iran and Iraq, control was lost. Something had to be done.
After September 11th, 2001, the United States, the Bush regime in particular, launched a campaign, a sort of an unbounded, unending war for greater empire under the rubric of a war on terror. The architects of that envisioned creating an unchallenged and unchallengeable U.S. empire. These neocon theorists argue that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that without the Soviet Union, without this nuclear-armed superpower confronting the United States, the U.S. reigned unchallenged militarily. And if it did not act decisively, new challenges would emerge and it would go the way of other empires. I mean, the Russian empires collapsed twice in the 20th century. The Austro-Hungarian, the French, the British. Empires rise and fall increasingly quickly, and people like Paul Wolfowitz, like Dick Cheney, like Louis Libby were very aware of this. So when September 11th came, they seized on this attack. They felt they had a political opening. Again, once in a lifetime. George Bush writes in his diary that night, this was the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to launch this boundless war to reshape the Middle East and the whole world.
The U.S. invaded Iraq and removed a brutal dictator from power, a dictator that we supported through his worst crimes. Saddam Hussein was our ally until he stepped out of line and invaded Kuwait without our permission, turning him into an instant enemy. To regain control, we invaded Iraq.
Attacking Iraq was a war crime. There are only two instances in which war is legal. UN authorization, which the United States didn't have, or an imminent threat. Neither one applied. This was actually under the Nuremberg standards a war crime, the supreme crime of aggressive war. That's what this is. And of course, one of the ways I think the discourse in this country is so corrupted is everyone talks about this war as a mistake. No, it was not a mistake. It was a crime. This was a war carried out for very specific and conscious political and economic objectives. It wasn't an error. It was a crime. And the same situation applies with regard to Iran. An attack on Iran, whatever the level of development of their nuclear program is or isn't, would be a war crime.